Hello, my name is Rebecca Hancock, and I am a Patient Safety and Quality Advisor in the Patient Safety Center of Indiana Hospital Association, and we are recording some stories for the Sepsis Awareness Month. Today we have Lisa Bartlett Davis with us. Lisa Bartlett Davis is a sepsis hero as designated by the Sepsis Alliance, and she's going to share with us her journey in grief to advocacy as a result of her husband's death with sepsis. And we're so grateful to have Lisa with us. She's become such a great advocate for sepsis care in the state. Lisa, please share with us your story about your husband's illness and death.
Thank you for having me. So Jeff was a manager at Chili's restaurant in Carbondale, Illinois. I had just gotten home with the kids, got them settled in bed, and he called me at about 10:30 at night on October 19th, 2012, and told me he was shaking uncontrollably and he didn't know what was wrong with him. So I told him to go ahead and go to the hospital and then see what was wrong and then give me a call back. He called me back about 5 minutes later and said that he was shaking so badly that he couldn't drive his 6-speed Camaro to the hospital, and asked me if I could come. So I called the babysitter to have them come over the house, and I headed to the hospital. I didn't know whether he was already at the hospital or he was still at Chili's restaurant, so I went to Chili's first, and they told me that a coworker had driven him to the hospital. So I got there about 30 minutes after he triaged, so I didn't know at that time what he did or didn't tell the triage nurse. I got there, and he was already in the room, so I went in, and he was very coherent, very alert still at that time. He did have about 104 fever. And he, after I got his records, his respiratory rate was 26, and he already had a high heart rate at that point. It was about 2 hours, I think, before I saw the doctor initially come in. The nurse was working with him and had him do a urine sample and things like that. They really failed to take his blood pressure often as well. So the doctor came in and said that he had the flu. This was about 1 o'clock in the morning. Told me he had the flu, gave me a sheet on Tamiflu, and said that he would be discharged shortly. He was not discharged shortly. We sat there for a long time without any interaction again, till about 3:30. They had the shift change at 3 o'clock, so I only saw the first ER doctor one time, and the second one had a gunshot victim that took priority over Jeff at the time, so she didn't come in for a while either. I think they had the shift change at 3, and I think it was about 5 o'clock before I ever saw her, and she came in and during this time, they failed to take proper physical examination. It's really sketchy about the medical history because they finally realized that he had chest clips in his chest x-ray. One of the nurses noticed it. So they finally came in and asked me what the chest clips were from. And I said, well, he doesn't have a spleen. And this was the first time that they found out that he didn't have a spleen, and this was like 5 o'clock in the morning, about 7 hours after he had been there already. So that changed things a little bit. So the second ER doctor really didn't feel comfortable releasing him without doing a spinal tap. So they told me they were going to set him up for a spinal tap. They went ahead and did that. They moved him to a larger room to do the spinal tap, and they were in the process of setting him up when his blood pressure plummeted to 60/42. And the nurse looked at me and said, he's sick, he's really, really sick. And I responded by saying, that's all I can do is pray. And this time, they still thought he had the flu. He'd almost been discharged. So they still really didn't know what was going on. With the blood pressure plummeting, they started, trying to find some source of infection, and they finally requested IV antibiotics. He'd already gotten some fluids during this time, but probably not enough. So they ordered the IV antibiotics. It took like another hour for them to actually get there. So they started him on IV antibiotics and told me that he would be moved to ICU. He would be there 3 to 5 days. So they moved him to ICU. I think probably the next significant thing that happened was he started having a rash on his face, and I'm the one who noticed it. The nurse did not notice it, and she acted like I was stupid whenever I addressed her with it. It started on his left cheek, and of course it had not been there before. I'd never seen it. That was probably about, 10 o'clock in the morning when I first noticed that. So he'd already been there like 12 hours at this point. So they finally decided to bring an infectious disease doctor in and his primary care doctor, and they put me in the room with him, and the infectious disease told me that there was not a good outlook. She gave him about a 30 to 50% chance of making it. And at this time, I had no clue from anybody else that he might die. I had a lot of things going on. I had visitors at this time. I was nursing our little girl, so I was trying to pump milk at the same time, and it was just a lot of stuff going on. But I finally decided at 1 o'clock, I went back in and sat with him, and I took a picture of his face because he had the purpura spread over his entire face at this point. I asked him if he wanted to be life flighted to St. Louis, Missouri, which was the next biggest town, and he said yes. And that was the last thing we ever said to each other. I had a bunch of people from church. My pastor was there. He had prayed for him, and I was out in the waiting room and trying to, I didn't have a clue at this point, so I was trying to entertain everybody, to visit with everybody and stuff. And so they finally came out and asked if he could be intubated for the life flight, and I said yes because I still didn't, have a clue he was going to pass away. Of course, if I would have known, I would have never left his side. That's one thing that the nurses could have helped me with was better prepared and better bedside manner. I would have never left his side at that point. I had him life flighted. So take note that it took him 5 hours to get life flighted out of there. I requested it about 1 o'clock, and about 6 o'clock they finally life flighted him. It was about a 2.5 hour drive to St. Louis. Jeff's general manager from Chili's was with me, so he drove me to the hospital, and my sister was there as well. He coded before I ever made it to the hospital. They called me on his cell phone. They didn't even have my cell phone number, incorrect contact information. But they called and told me that he had coded. And I called my pastor to have him pray. And then they called me back to tell me that they got him back. So we finally made it to the hospital, and we were security escorted, it was that bad, to his room in ICU. Shortly after, they put me in a waiting room. They put me with a chaplain. Shortly after, he coded it the second time. And at that point, I knew that it was looking pretty bad, so I dropped to my knees in the hospital room and I just prayed for him, let me keep him. That our babies were only 9 months and 3 at the time, and that they needed him, and that I needed him. And I still thought God was going to heal him. And then we were in the waiting room again, and I heard over the intercom, code red 8C, code red 8C, and I knew that was Jeff's room, and God just spoke to me, and he said, Lisa, you have to let him go. So I went to the ICU room, and I put my hands on the man's hands that was doing CPR, silently telling him to stop. He had never gotten his heartbeat back, so I was grateful that I didn't have to see him take his last breath or anything like that. But he was already with the glory of the Lord at that point, and his heartbeat never came back. They told me I could stay with him as long as I wanted to. So I just kind of rubbed his hair and told him over and over again that I loved him and that I would take care of the babies. And that was it. We were really kind of worried because they had made it out to be like it might be an infectious disease. So we stayed in a hotel room because he passed at 10:52 on October 20th, 2012. About 24 hours after the time of arrival at the hospital, he was gone. Because Jeff didn't have a spleen, he developed OPSI, overwhelming post-malignancy infection, and I think that's why the bacteria took hold and killed him a lot faster than it would have with somebody that had a spleen. When we stayed in the hotel room, they told me to follow up with a doctor and take the children to the pediatrician to make sure that it wasn't an infectious disease, and it turned out that it was not. They after extensive autopsy, St. Louis even told me they thought they should do an extensive autopsy because they could never find the source of infection. They still couldn't find the source of infection even after the autopsy. So I to this day still don't know what the source of infection was. A lot of unanswered things that I've had to deal with. But he did have a Streptococcus pneumonia, was a bacteria strain. I do know that for sure. He was 40 years old in 3 days. Just as fast as that, sepsis just took him, and he was a very fit man. He worked out 5 days a week. So it doesn't matter how healthy you are with sepsis. It can take hold like anything else.
Wow, Lisa, that is just an incredible story, and I know that you have done so much with sharing of this story so that we, the medical community, can learn from your very, very unfortunate circumstances and experiences. And I've seen now how important it is in the literature to those who've had a splenectomy to be aware of the risk of sepsis. Literature has come out that's shown that 22% of the sources of infection are unknown, which makes it even more difficult to treat. And that's where he falls, into that 22% of unknown sepsis sources. And Lisa, tell me what you've done since this time to help deal with your grief and in honor of his memory.
I was knocked down for about a year. I went through a lot. And with the children being so small, they kept me so busy because I had 2 older children as well from a previous marriage, so I had 4 altogether. So I was a 35-year-old widow with 4 kids, and 2 were under the age of 3. probably about 15 months, I guess, after he passed away, I started the annual Jeff Davis 5K, and that one was in Cobden, Illinois, the town that we lived in when he passed away. I had about 46 participants, and I raised about $2,000 for Sepsis Alliance. We moved to Colorado because I did remarry actual active duty military man at the time when I met him. He got orders for Fort Carson in Colorado, so we did move to Colorado. And I held the annual 5K there for 4 years, and then he got out of the military, and so we were free to move again. And I had let my 2 older girls move in with their dad whenever I did move to Colorado, and so we decided that we were going to come back and live by as close as I could get to with them because I worked for the government. So I had to find an installation where I could transfer to. So I transferred to Crane Naval Base in southern Indiana, and we live in southern Indiana right now. And so I hosted the 6th annual Jeff Davis 5K for sepsis awareness in Indianapolis, Indiana, this past June 29th, and raised about $2,600 for Sepsis Alliance. It's always a challenge starting over in a new place. But besides the annual 5K, I've put 2 billboards up, one in by Fort Campbell Army Post in Kentucky, and the other one here in southern Indiana. And I also had a friend put 3 billboards of Jeff in California for me in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I tried for 3 years to get mandatory sepsis protocols passed in Colorado. I had the health department on board. I had a Senator Gardner was on board. The Colorado Hospital Association finally shut it down because they didn't want them. So I had a 3-year effort there, but it didn't turn out for our favor. I've set up tables at multiple 5Ks, multiple events, anywhere that I can get a table. I set up for sepsis awareness there. Just sharing on Facebook. I've helped save several lives because people recognize the symptoms over the constant posts that I put on social media. I know I've had at least 5 to 10 people come back and say, if it wasn't for your post, I wouldn't have recognized the symptoms, and they could have passed away. And I was a 2016 Sepsis Hero, and I've also been recognized for honorable mention from the Global Sepsis Alliance, and they're actually going to post all my events that I put on this year on their Global Sepsis Alliance page. So I've spoken at Longmont Hospital in Longmont, Colorado. I'm always open to speaking at hospitals or any group functions just to raise awareness. I'm currently trying to get mandatory sepsis protocols passed in Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana now are taken care of. I still want a Jeff's Law. I'm still after a Jeff's Law. I want his name on it. So I'm trying in Missouri because he actually did die in Missouri. So that's what I've been working on, and I'm definitely going to try to do the White House petition to get mandatory sepsis protocols passed nationwide now that I have Global Sepsis Alliance posting my events on their website. I tried back in November, and it requires 100,000 signatures in 30 days or they won't consider it. So it only brought about 1,000 signatures in the 30 days when I did it before. But now that I have global attention, I'm going to try that again. Because why would we go state by state if we can get it done nationally?
Well, when your husband died in 2012, I think that generally speaking, we were behind the times and the guidelines had not been well implemented. In October 2015, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid put guidelines in place across the United States, and hospitals are complying with that now as they're evolving very quickly and improving their compliance. So I think your story, your experiences, your advocacy has made a lot of difference in getting that started, along with some of the other advocates, Carl Flatley and Rory Staunton's father, the timing that you were proceeding all this. I just thank you so much for making a difference in Indiana at this time, and we'll encourage more people to participate in the Sepsis 5K next year, but I expect you'll have in Indianapolis again, and we'll publicize that for you. So, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your story. You're making a difference. I've seen your billboards on I-69 down north of Evansville as I travel the state, and I know from where that's coming now, so thank you.
Thank you very much.